I've come a long way to see a little Willie.
Actually, it's a tank that was built during the First World War to break through the trenches.
With a very surprising link to London.
We've come to the Tank Museum at Bovington, Dorset.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Hidden London Hangouts. My name is Alex Grundon. We wouldn't ordinarily do two bus-related episodes back to back, but this is relevant today and it's all going to explain why. I don't do this on my own. I've got three amazing people from the London Transport Museum to guide us through whatever we're talking about, and today it's a cracker. First of all, Chris Nix. I think you've got a Soviet TV transmitter in your background. What are you doing?
Well, I thought I'd get all the kit out, given that we've got a military field to this one today. So we've got the 17-pounder tank shell in the background. We've got the Army Service Corps jacket on. We've even got the Army mug, which comes with handy phrases. Do you know what a plonker is?
Yes, but what do you think it is on your mug?
Well, it says on this. So it says it's a shell landing in a trench.
I love that. I wasn't too far off with my definition. City Holloway, you're wearing your popper with pride?
Yep, I've got my TFL Poppy team, because a few years ago I did organize the TFL poppies for the museum. So I'm excited about this. It was a while ago that we went to visit this marvelous place that we're talking about today. So I'm excited to revisit that, and sad that we all are wearing just short sleeves and it was sunny and now it's cold.
It is indeed. November is a tough month, but Laura Hilton Brown, I'm loving your badge on your sling.
Thank you very much. This actually is another TFL. It's obviously the roundel with the poppies. And I actually got this when Siddy was heading up that project and organising the badges for the museum. So I got myself one of these, and I think I got my little boy one of the train ones as well. But they're beautiful badges and obviously well worth wearing.
Lovely stuff. Fran from London Bridge Station has got me the London Underground poppy badge as well. I'll come and collect that as well. Thank you very much. Now, today we decided that we wanted to do something to commemorate this moment in our year. And we went to the Bovington Tank Museum in Dorset to find out how London's buses helped in the war effort in World War I. And I don't think any of us realised, Chris, how important London's buses were in the war and how we fought it in this country.
Yeah, so the First World War was really the first that relied on that mechanical mobilisation. So, about 1,000 London buses, largely B-types, were requisitioned by the War Office and used as troop carriers. And when we commemorated that story back for the anniversary, the 100-year anniversary of the war, we created Battle Bus. We restored a B-type bus that had served in the First World War as a troop carrier, and we discovered a lot of history there that was quite surprising. And what I also discovered was there was this shared history that the tanks had evolved out of the First World War and using similar available technology. So at the time, back in my head, something just lodged away that there was this link between early buses and early tanks, and we'll explore that today.
Indeed. So to kick all this off, we decided to get a little bit of background from the curator of the museum, David Willey, and we climbed into this tiny, tiny tank to give us an idea of what that moment might feel like when we were actually working on the front line in one of these tiny vehicles. David, I think the thing that staggers me the most is these tanks were being driven, powered, if you like, by London bus engines at times.
Yeah, at times. This one is something called a Mark IV. It's the one that Britain made the most of in the First World War. This actually has a pre-war Daimler, 105 horsepower. It was basically a tractor engine in this case, but they're looking in the First World War of what do we have as powerful engines. And another tank that was built called the Whippet ends up having two that were B-type bus engines, Tyler engines, two of them put together to try and give it enough power to manoeuvre something that's big and heavy. This one, we've got 28 tons, so 105 horsepower is still not really that powerful enough, but it gets it to go along at about 3 miles an hour. Production wise, this is one of those vehicles that as you look around it, it's using things like the shipbuilding industry. We've got riveting, we've got bolting together. It's very, very basic and crude.
Because that was what was available during war.
It is. You've got to find people that can manufacture it. So they start off with some agricultural manufacturers. The navies come first. So you've also got that other problem, which is where are we going to go to find space? So they go to some of the transport companies, things like railway companies. Can we get them using some of their heavy industry skills to start putting these together? The war's already begun. The Navy gets the priorities, aircraft as well, you know, they get the first pickings on things like alloys. So tanks come a poor second, but they are still being really encouraged by people like Field Marshal Haig. When he sees their potential, he really wants these. So we start quite a major undertaking back in Britain to get these out to the troops.
And you've got 8 people on board this thing. It's tiny. What were they all doing?
So in this space, to be honest, this is, compared to some modern tanks, this is fairly spacious, but an 8-man crew in here, there'd be 2 up the actually I'm facing the wrong way, I'm actually in the commander's position. There'd be a driver here as well. There'd be 2 gearsmen at the back. You need 4 people just to drive and steer the tank. There's also 2 gunners either side to man. In this tank, it's what they call a male tank. It's got 6-pounder guns. Female tanks just carry machine guns. So 8 crew members, all busy doing something right with the engine in the middle of the vehicle. So in next to no time, we're going to be hot, we're going to be sweaty, we've got fumes coming from the engine, and all our conversation, if the engine starts, forget it.
It's
so
basically
noisy.
silent. You can't talk.
It's
just
talk.
too noisy and too filthy.
Hand signals is the only way you're going to do things, or shouting in someone's ear. So they start learning. So if we want to turn left or right, it's a hand signal, 1 or 2 to the gearsman at the back. So they know when they're going to disengage the engine.
And it turns.
It does, that's the idea. You're keeping one track going, and that's how you turn left or right at the great top speed of about 3 miles an hour.
And of course, with the world wars have been periods of great social change. And one thing you said earlier was that these tanks were often made by women. And in many ways, it was to get their husbands home from war quick. So they were working faster.
So you're looking here at something that, again, this idea of national effort. The First World War, it's everybody seems to be involved in some way. So again, back to the manufacturing. So Foster's at Lincoln, about 1/3 of their workforce is female. We're running out of skills. We've got to train up new people. Women are entering, not just for London Transport, as Clippies and working on so many new jobs, but they're also going into heavy manufacturing. And if you look at some of the photographs of the women who are working at Foster's in Lincoln, they're wearing what they call sweetheart badges. That identifies the unit that their dad, their husband, their boyfriend is working in. And their efforts, when you think about women's efforts in the First World War, that's one of the reasons women get the vote just after the war, because the arguments in 1913, suffragettes, etc., you know, they're being put down that way. After that huge effort that goes in the First World War, that leads to women giving the vote.
I know a fair few small hand signals that would have been very useful actually in the war effort. But Chris, just such a, or actually Siddy, because you were in there. I mean, you know, it was a tiny space, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, I'm 5'9", and just to fit my legs there trying to film you guys was incredibly uncomfortable. I can't imagine trying to do that in warfare, boiling hot, incredibly loud, and just in this kind of moving sort of tin can. I don't mean that in like, but you know, just, you know, obviously very impressive, but I'm just saying, like, it feels very much like you're just compressed with all this like heavy machinery. So yeah, I can't even imagine what that would have felt like for those who manned those vehicles in the First World War.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating place to go, actually, with so many different things to see. You don't actually have to be into the war or into history or even into tanks to take something from that particular museum. So then we decided to have a bit of a wander around, and we found the Whippet tank, which actually has an incredible link to London.
Well, well, well.
Well, the Whippet is where the idea for this visit came along.
Really?
Yeah, because back in 2014 at the museum we were creating Battle Bus, which is a B-type bus which was used to carry troops to the front of the First World War. About 1,000 buses from London did that. One of the surprising things that I found in the research when we were rebuilding Battle Bus is that the thing that's under the bonnet, the engine in that, big engine, is the same type that gets used in these, a pair of them under the bonnet, because they were an available, really reliable petrol engine that was capable of moving something like that.
But this one is actually a quicker one than the one we were in earlier. So this is the Whippet, so it's very fast because it's at whipping speed. What the highest speed it could reach was 8 miles an hour, and this tank was built basically so after you've breached the lines of the First World War, you breached through the trenches of the enemy and you've made a gap in that kind of defence. You want a quicker vehicle or quicker tank to go through and sort of exploit the gap that you've created, and that's what this did. But the Mark IV that we were in earlier was the one that kind of breached the enemy lines first. But I love that it's called a Whippet because it just seems sort of colloquial and cute for something that is, you know, warfare effectively.
And I think the engineering and the staffing of these vehicles is also quite an interesting thing because there's a lot of shared ground between buses and tanks in that as well. Searle, who used to be the chief engineer at LGOC with the London buses, went on to work on tanks. And the Army Service Corps is the part of the army that's responsible for driving and moving vehicles around. So some of the bus drivers would go on to be tank drivers because same mechanics really.
And didn't you say that you found that in the Second World War there was a potential that some tanks were moved through the underground? We're going to explore that a bit later?
We will, yeah. So quite a few surprising links there.
It's another fascinating vehicle, Chris. And as I say, it's the link to London is as obvious as the day.
Yeah, I think the size of these things from the outside, they're massive outside, but as you alluded to with the previous one, inside they feel tiny. And it's partly because of the number of people you have to cram into them to operate them with the multiple engines, the guns, and commanding the thing. So phenomenally loud things to be inside. If you've ever been around our B-type bus when its engine's running, just one of those when you stood outside it next to it is quite loud. So being inside the engine compartment with two of them going on and the guns as well are just unimaginable. And all of this kind of chatter on here is a bit redundant. You couldn't chew the fat, as it says on here, very much inside one of those things when the engine is running. We almost, by the way, when we were looking to restore Battle Bus, we almost ended up using a Tyler engine inside it, which would have been one of the ones inside that tank.
So whilst we were in one of the tanks chatting to David Willey, Laura went for a wander around the really moving exhibition all about World War I. And I love the fact that Laura interprets words and pictures in the way that she does. So here's what she found.
So we're stood on this lovely outside grassy area as a tank is being tested from the workshop. And what's lovely actually about what's happening right now is these guys have just been in a Mark IV tank,
Mark IV tank
to do a really lovely interview with the curator, David. And there wasn't enough room for me, it was a little bit squished inside. So I just had, if you can hear me above the tank, I just had a little wander outside while these guys were doing that really lovely clip. And what I really liked about the bits that I saw were there were some really great stories about the guys that went to war, and these guys were talking inside the tank about that and about the women as well that contributed by building the tank.
Yeah, lots of women building them.
Found a quote. I have to read it to you off my phone because I want to do it justice and actually get it right for you. But it's by a guy called Basil Enriquez. I mean, what a fab name to start with, right? And he wrote this on the 15th of September, 1916. And it's a letter home. All that we were just discussing as a team before, how the letters home they're really lovely. There's so much in those letters, but they often didn't depict the honest truth of what these people were going through. Yeah. And this quote, I loved it because we did Hampstead the other week, right? This is about war. It's just like being at Hampstead Heath on a bank holiday.
It's an awful thunderstorm though, without any rain and without any women. I mean, what a fab quote from a guy that is commanding a tank in the first tank attack. And for me, I don't know about you, Sid, but for me it's about the people that went there and they commanded these tanks. They took these people into battle. And this museum is fascinating. It's full of all of those stories, right?
Absolutely, and just, you know, the women were building the tanks because they wanted to get their husbands and you know, brothers and boyfriends and fathers home quicker. So, you know, there was an urgency to building them. And then also that, you know, the letters home, they're getting the feedback right from the front. And so they're actually understanding what an urgency it is to create these vehicles. So it's really fascinating just to get a sense of that.
Absolutely. War impacted everybody wherever you were. Frontline was very different to being at home. But we were saying before, being at home and waiting for people to come back and building all of these amazing things that helped people on the front line, still an absolute treasure for what happened back in the day.
Yeah, which would you rather? Would you rather be at home waiting for bad news or be at the front line, you know, fighting? It's a tough one.
Right.
Laura, you're so good to have around because you see detail in things that perhaps we would miss. It really moved you, didn't it?
It did, and it's very sweet of you to say that. Thank you. I think that, well, what struck me first of all is that I think David actually said that the tank you were in had a crew of 8, and even just the 4 of you kind of squished in there, I couldn't fit in. So that blows my mind, first of all, just, you know, how small those tanks are, but how many crew were in there. So I probably could have squeezed in, but it would have been very uncomfortable. So yeah, I just took myself off for a bit of a wander, and I feel like it's probably not a museum that I would have readily have gone to and chosen to go to. And I feel awful saying that, but that is the truth. But after we went there, I was absolutely fascinated by it. I thought it was brilliant. And I came home and I was talking about it, you know, to my family for days. I thought it was great. And some of the stories of the guys that were crewing and commanding these tanks that were just ripped from their normal daily lives and weren't necessarily, you know, fighters or soldiers. I think the guy that I referred to, Basil, was a social worker before he left to go to the war, and ended up for, you know, crewing this crazy vehicle that he'd had no experience of prior to that situation. And another story that really moved me about him was that he made friends with another chap. He was called George, and George lost his life during the war, and it really, really affected Basil. Like, it really changed his ability to function. He got home and he was fine and he was with his family, but, you know, George never left him. And how many thousands of stories will there be like that? And this museum, you know, captures that beautifully. There's some really, really lovely story, and the way they tell it is great. So yes, the vehicles are amazing, but the story for me was what really moved me.
Isn't it interesting as well? That is what comes out at this time of year. It's the stories from people who actually fought or played at some role in the war effort. And it's something that struck me, actually, I didn't mention it before, but I will mention it now. When we were sat in that tank, I was just thinking that the crew in there could only communicate really via hand signal. And when they eventually got out of the tanks at the end of that particular movement, wherever it was, I'd imagine the last thing they actually wanted to do was talk, because of the noise, the sheer noise of what they put up with. And so therefore, I wonder what communication was like at that time, Chris.
Well, I think you got a bit of a hint of that with Laura and Siddy doggedly carrying on with that piece of presentation. They were inside the tank and they were a considerable distance away from the tank. You can hear just how loud that was while they were, that was actually the first tank that was being driven after lockdown. They just got that out of the workshop, and it was it's actually a recovery tank, one that's designed to go and pull other ones out of, you know, fields and so on. But incredibly loud things to be around, and impressive that you guys managed to carry on and deliver that with that going on.
True pros, as always. Now, next up on our little list, our whistle-stop tour of Bovington Tank Museum, was the Manchester tank, a bit of homely for Chris there. So this is the closest thing we've got to a bus. It's even going to your neck of the woods.
It is. So I'm from Manchester. It's named Manchester. What's not to like? And this is a Valentine tank, and it's a Second World War era tank. And the use of bus engines carried on after the First World War. This one has got a big 6-litre AEC bus engine in it. So that is a proper bus underneath the bonnet there.
And for non-experts, AEC was the company that made the Routemaster, isn't it?
That's right, Associated Equipment Company. And they made buses and parts for buses as well and sold them to other people, including the War Department.
But interestingly, only 3 crew, and it's the fastest one we've seen so far. This one has a top speed of 15 miles an hour.
That's right. I mean, 3 crew though in that. It's with a big, massive engine. It's not going to be comfy, is it?
No. But it's pretty impressive to see how war exploited stuff that was available, bus engines, in order to help the war effort.
That's the thing. If you want to take this into battle and do its job, reliability is key, and AEC made very reliable and powerful engines, and that's really what you need for this.
Well, you can drive it, I'll be the clippy. How's that?
Okay, let's go.
Let's do it. See, again, another clear link to London, Chris. And it's nice to know that the huge bus network in London had such a clear role in the war.
Yeah, the Associated Equipment Company really did make an awful lot of things. But I still can't imagine a vehicle of that size with a bus engine and 3 people inside it. Again, eek, very toasty, very loud.
That was a bit of a boys' trip. We then decided to send the girls to see the Matador.
Laura, this one's got wheels. It doesn't have a track, so it's an armoured vehicle called the Matador.
It was built by the AEC, who also manufactured the Routemaster and the RT bus.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So this type of vehicle obviously would be needed.
Yep.
Because it can go a lot faster than a tank. How fast can it go?
We're going 41 miles per hour with a crew of up to 4 people.
Yeah, but you'd probably have to keep this on roads rather than all terrain, because obviously it would be pretty bumpy otherwise.
So finally something on rubber wheels and that actually moves at a decent speed. Well done there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting because every time I think of tanks as on, moving belts, and I didn't realize that they actually had some that were, that had wheels on it and used for that type of warfare. So I was pleasantly surprised to find the Matador.
I suppose that's technically it's an armoured vehicle rather than a tank, but yeah, it's impressive nonetheless, I think.
Yeah.
Now, Laura, you weren't very approving of my behaviour in the workshop, were you? Because Siddy and I got a little carried away with a tank with an enormous gun shooting off the top of it. I would
say, excuse me, I think don't drag me into this. I'm sorry.
I think if I'm right thinking, Siddles, you actually dressed up as Margaret Thatcher, didn't you, at one point?
No. And this was also Chris's idea. I just got plonked in there as some sort of prop for everyone to maneuver.
So dear follower, this is what actually happened. My beloved wife Helen suggested it'd be quite funny if Siddy reprised the famous photo of Margaret Thatcher in a tank with flag and so on. So Siddy gamely volunteered to do that. We took that photo. And then Alex decided he wanted a photo of his own that was a bit more like
risque.
Share in a certain video.
Laura, would you say, Mummy, that you were approving or disapproving of our general behaviour that morning?
I think at this point, by the time that these photos were being taken, I was slinking to the back of this enormous warehouse where all these tanks were, just thinking, oh my goodness, they're actually doing this in front of people. It was funny, but very inappropriate.
You can't take us anywhere. We are deeply grateful to the museum for allowing us to have the fun, but also get the insight that we did. But let's have a look at what happened in that workshop, the cleaned up version. You love your books. What have you been buying on eBay now?
Well, what I've got here is a book I found for the Railway Executive Committee. And this is a book which gives instructions on how to move armoured fighting vehicles around during the Second World War.
Like this?
By rail, like this. And this is a Matilda II Mark II, also one which had an AEC engine in one of the types of the Matilda. And these tanks obviously are very good on the battlefront, but you can't drive them across the channel to France to do their job. They have to be taken by other means, and that's where the railways come in.
Tell us more about this, because this is intriguing.
Well, I bought this because I was just interested to see whether there was a connection, because of course Railway Executive Committee were in an underground place during the war.
Based at Down Street.
Right, so they were there planning how to move things like this around on the nation's railways, and they had to be very careful about where they took them because they're big. Okay, and one of the things that you'll see in here, if I just give you the book, is you have to think about getting them through things like bridges and tunnels. And so that is a gauge outline to make sure that you aren't going to crash this into tunnels and bridges. And there is one bit of the underground which it is allowed, it seems, to take tanks. All of the tube, most of the underground is banned, but can you guess the one bit which isn't banned on the underground for carrying that?
The only place I can think of is it starts at Paddington, because Paddington was the bit of the Metropolitan line that went round towards Moorgate-ish, maybe Liverpool Street, was freight as well, wasn't it?
Yeah,
is that the bit?
That's right, and it's not ruled out in that book. I don't know whether it ever happened, but I was just fascinated to find there's one bit of the tube that is not ruled out.
So you could have been standing on the platform at Baker Street and a tank rolls past you?
According to that book.
How cool is that? How cool is that? See?
Not something I think we'll see these days, but cool that it may have happened, right?
Train on platform 4.
Tank on platform
tank.
5.
A tank engine, yes. A tank, no.
How cool is that? See, I like your eBay purchases. These are great.
Good purchase.
Well, I had fun. And Chris brought his book. He loves his props, don't you, Chris?
I do. I think I bring a little bit of life and joy to things. And also surprises. I mean, who'd have thought that you could have taken a tank through the underground?
Absolutely. Can you imagine that, high Barnet 1 minute and all of a sudden a low loader comes through with a tank on it? They'd be like, what is that? But I'd still love to see it. Laura, a lovely day, wasn't it, down there? The sun was shining and the perfect, this is how much planning goes into these. We filmed this in June for today. I think we did quite well, but it was a lovely day down there, wasn't it, Laura?
It was a really lovely day. And I thought David was hugely knowledgeable and really, really excited to take us around and show us all the different tanks. And I honestly didn't know about how quickly they developed the kind of engine and the speed and the exterior as well as the interior. I knew none of this before going. So that was super interesting and really lovely to come away having learned so much as well. And Siddy's right, it feels like so long ago as well. It was the beginning of the summer and we're now kind of hitting the winter. So yes, we did plan this. Alex, you're so super right. We tried to time this one really well for everyone, but I feel like I've learned a lot. David was great. And obviously it was great, as always, hanging out with you guys.
Well, I would never normally have gone to a history museum about the war, but actually I'm really glad I did. RAF Hendon's another place to go to if you get the museum at Hendon. Is beautiful. Siddy, as always, Chris, thank you very much for your insight. Notes, queries and questions. Your questions answered about previous episodes, comments and that kind of thing. The Isle of Wight episode is still rumbling with joy. I think we're well past 20,000 views in just over a week and a half, 2 weeks. So this is amazing. We're so delighted. And we're back to my guarding duties because there were questions about why I didn't leave the guard's door open when the train was being removed from the station, moving on to the next station. And I knew there was a reason, and I knew because this was my second trip on those trains. And I remember that the doors the train won't move if the doors aren't shut. Okay. And Mark from the company that's actually organised getting those trains running on the Island Line is so lovely, Mark Brintonello. And he says, in answer to the question about the guard's door, on a class 484, it has to be closed, similar to most other national rail trains, before the traction interlock circuit is complete and the blue indicator light illuminates. Without the traction interlock, the brakes won't release and the driver can't get power. Sounds like there needs to be a hidden London hangout on the basics of how a train works. Incidentally, on the 38 stock, you could get an interlock with the guard's door open, as the old rules required the guard to observe the train departing the platform, both on British Rail and London Transport. Now, neither have many guards operated service. I hope that helps. It does, doesn't it, Christopher?
I think that'll deal with the rising numbers right there.
Yeah, there we go. Let's just squash those numbers down.
I'm sure we could weave it in somewhere in the future episode.
Absolutely. And Soy used to be a guard on the Underground, and the guard's door was on a separate circuit, so independent on the passenger doors. You could leave it open all the time and it wouldn't affect the pilot light. The pilot light. Do you remember that light that came on when the doors were shut and the guard could then move the train? Oh, Soy, you're fabulous. Right. What's it? Paul Chapman says, nice to see the video about the old route master. Can Chris Nix mention my name, please? I would appreciate it. Chris, just say Paul Chapman.
If that's Paul Chapman, our lovely friend who's built quite a lot of our display vehicles and helped maintain some of our vehicles, then yes, hello, Paul. Nice to know you're watching.
I'm so glad all of our fans are so easily pleased. Hello, Paul. Cindy, can you say hello to Paul Chapman as well?
Hello, Paul Chapman.
Laura, could you just say hello to Paul Chapman as well?
Hello, Paul Chapman.
Gizmo the cat, are you all right? Yep. Hello, Paul Chapman from the cat as well. Dave Bassett says, well done, guys, on driving the Route Master. I got to drive one many years ago at North Weald Aerodrome. So did I. On one of those bus rallies. Right, what is it? Rob Lilly says, the amazing dirt detectives hit the bus road again. Too right. Michael Hudson says, I'd love to come and show you how the Route Master should be driven and how you should use the gearbox, even around central London. Does that mean we got it wrong, Siddles?
Oh dear.
Excuse me, can we not remember my steely reserve driving that bus? Absolutely focused like it was my job. I thought I did pretty good, actually. But
Too
maybe...
right.
Nobody showed Stiggy Holloway how to drive.
Stiggy Holloway. It's that Stiggy. Also, interestingly, the Corridors of Power watches us as well, because MP's News Watch says, love this, but surreal not hearing a city talk while she was driving.
All right, sometimes I focus, guys. Jeez.
I love it. I had to ding out more words than you actually heard.
It was the quietest 3 minutes of the entire episode, I will say. Then just done nothing, and then just done.
I love it as well. And Chicago Gardener, hello Chicago Gardener, says one of the funniest hangouts was the bus episode. Hubby and I loved it. You're all so funny and wonderful together. Hope we get to say hello when we next visit London next year. They're from Chicago. Oh, Chicago. This week the planes are flying back to America, which is rather lovely. I'd have loved to have been on one, but sadly I'm not. I'm sitting here. Thank you as always, Christopher Nix. You were wonderful today. Thanks for your inspiration and leadership as we negotiated the tanks.
Now, there's a word for that. Thankfully, we haven't gone pear-shaped, but on the back of this, I've discovered that chocolate orange is apparently the term for commanding officer.
Well, our very own commanding officer, our very own Lord Chocolate Orange there. Thank you very much. Siddles, bless you.
Thank you. Lovely to revisit the tanks just in time for Remembrance Sunday.
And Laura, thank you very much, as always, just for interpreting the world in a way that perhaps we wouldn't normally do.
No worries whatsoever. I do want to say, though, that on the mug there was pucker. Can I say that was a pucker episode?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
There we go. Pucker, guys.
Nice one. Please don't ever think that, I know this episode is not, unlike all the others, is not scripted, but we do try and plan ahead to make things moment appropriate, really. And so when tomorrow's 11th of the 11th comes out, 11 o'clock, please observe the silence for all the people who fought and were lost in the wars. As always, keep an eye on YouTube. Thank you very much indeed for watching us. The numbers on the episodes are crazy. The management of the museum get very excited about this. 20,000 people, what? Really? They're loving it. So like, subscribe and comment below these videos. Keep the comments nice, please, it's nice. And also on Instagram, find us, Christopher Nix, City Holloway, Hidden London Law, Alex Grunden, and at LT Museum. Next week is something huge and fabulous. So huge, we're going to need a bigger screen. Have yourself a great day and stay safe.